This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. If you've attended Lansing Community College in the last, 25 years, you may well know our guest. You may be one of the 10,000 or so students who went through a class taught and designed by her. She is somebody, though, that I don't think I really knew until I read this cover story in this week's City Pulse by Larry Cosentino. I'm very pleased to welcome Joanna Stark.
Thank you.
Hey, well, you're welcome, Joanna. It's great to have you with you. You know, and I've known you most of those 25 years.
You came to my class.
I did, and we're going to talk.
MSU.
Yes, and we'll talk about the format of your class. But I didn't really know you until I read this. It's a fascinating story. One of the things I didn't know is, of all things, you grew up on a farm in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me about what that was like.
Well, it was kind of a shock because we moved there during wartime, and we moved to a house that was not finished. I mean, it was an old house that hadn't been rehabbed, so we moved to a house that had no electricity until my father and my brother dug the holes for the REA.
Rural Electrical Authority.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. During the 30s. Yeah. And that's how we got electricity. And plumbing followed later and so forth. And I learned how to do a number of things, much of which I wasn't all that happy about. But it was really learning good skills. So I look back on those years as hard work, but learning lots of things about lots of animals and what farmers do. I have a great appreciation for farmers.
Yeah.
I still have 20 acres that I rent out.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So I'm still a farmer.
In that neck of the woods or here?
Yeah, right back in
Bowling Green.
Yeah.
I'm from Toledo, by the way.
Oh, well.
And I have a very pleasant childhood memory, maybe my earliest memory, of my mother dressing me up and putting me in, because she stayed at home, and she said, let's take the train to Bowling Green. And you can't do that anymore.
No.
But I remember it well, all dressed up, so excited to be on a train and getting down there and
to wonderful Bowling Green.
To Bowling Green. Okay. Well, so let's just continue chronologically.
Well, I went to a country school. That was a little bit of a shock, but I adjusted, and then I went to Bowling Green State University, where our whole family had gone, and so it was expected we would go there.
What did you study?
Well, I had only one choice. Girls at that time could either be a secretary and go to business school, or a nurse and go to nursing school, or if you wanted to go to college, you could be a teacher. Mm-hmm. But my parents were teachers and my grandparents were teachers, so it was not out of the line. My brother went on to be a med student and a doctor, but that wasn't possible for me.
Why was it not possible?
Oh, they just didn't think girls could do it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and you go a generation earlier, I think my mother was the oldest of three, but both of her siblings were guys. They got to go to college. One became a pharmacist, the other an engineer, but she went to business school, learned to type.
Yeah, right.
You did some typing, right?
You betcha. That's how I got through college, and I did it in Toledo, Ohio. Yeah. And
where'd you work in Toledo?
Owens, Illinois, of course.
Oh, of course.
And Autolite for a while.
Do you know who owns the Illinois building now?
No.
The Ide family.
Oh, my.
They're very big in Toledo.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, my. No, I haven't. I don't get to Toledo very much. Get down to Bowling Green from time to time.
Yeah, you still have family there.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, let's leap ahead a bit. So you got your degree in teaching, and then did you actually teach?
I did.
Yeah.
I got lots of offers from around the area, but I wanted to go to a big city. So my brother was in Cincinnati, and I said, you know, my folks would let me do that, so I did. I taught a couple of years at Indian Hills High School, which was a rather wealthy suburb of Cincinnati. And there's a Taft buried outside the school. I don't know which Taft. But, and then I got married. And
how'd you meet your husband?
Well, we lived next door to each other in Cincinnati. He was working on his PhD, and I was teaching. I didn't want to live in Indian Hills near my students because I was only about 4 years older than the oldest students there. So we met through a mutual friend, and the joke in the family is he coveted my car. I had a car. It was an 11-year-old car made before the war. I can't remember now that it gave me any trouble, but it was a car, and he had just learned to drive. He came out of the Bronx, and of course didn't learn to drive until he was 25.
Yeah.
So.
And how long have you been married?
Well, in February it'll be 62 years. 62
years.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And your husband, Stanley?
Stanley.
He's retired now from MSU, and that, I presume, is what brought you to our community.
That's what brought us here, right.
So what did you do in the early days? You have children, right?
Well, I raised children. I was a room mother for 11 years and baked a million cookies and did all those kinds of things. I was also part of a panel of American women in late 60s, which was my first real entree with diversity, because it was made up of different women from different ethnicities, and just speaking about their life and any discrimination they had encountered, which really is kind of what led into the diversity class I teach, because I bring in people from a certain ethnicity and ask them, how was it growing up, say, African American in white America? And they talk about it. And my students are not coming from a very diverse area. A lot of them are coming from outlying small towns, and this could be their first experience of hearing from someone who is different, who's the other. And that seems to be very meaningful for them.
And so you inherited the class, so to speak.
I did. I used to be pretty involved with him, and
this was your husband,
right? And when he started it, and he would always bring all the guests home, and I would do my wifely thing. Oh, but I got to meet a lot of people, and I would occasionally be a guest in his class. And then when he retired, nobody wanted to teach it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That says something.
Well, the business school wasn't ready for it. But
this
there was a visionary there.
Right?
The visionary was Mike Mock. And Mike says, I think this is a valuable class. And Mike was happy to take me on as a teacher, because I had been teaching at LCC at that point for almost 30 years.
What had you taught there?
20 years. Management classes, mostly. And so I taught it there for 5 years until they decided they needed to spend that big amount of money, which wasn't, on strategic management. But the class had been accepted as part of the core course for social sciences and social work and some other programs. And at the time, another visionary was in my life, and that was Scotty Putman, who was at LCC, the program manager for the management department. And at that time, LCC was introducing the requirement that everyone who gets a degree from LCC should have a class in either diversity or global interaction. And so Scotty says, Joanna, you should bring that class down here. So I did. And we pioneered it in 96, and 20 years later, we've probably put 10,000 students through it.
And describe the class for people who haven't been fortunate enough to take it.
Okay, it's not your ordinary management class. It's really a class on how to deal with people who are different, which I happen to think is a very key problem in management in many cases. And we just start off with talking about why do we have prejudice and how do we get it, and I lead them through some exercises that sort of prepare them, and then we start with differences. And the first difference we start with is male-female. And most of the young women in my class are surprised that we aren't totally equal by now. They think the war is all over, but it's not. You know, I mean, maybe we're getting 81 cents for every dollar that a man gets, but I get a lot of single mothers, and they're working hard to support their family. And so we deal with male-female, and then we go into ethnicities like Black African Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, and then we veer a little bit into what is turned out to be very provocative, which is lesbian, gay, bi, trans. And we end up with people with disabilities. They turn out to be, I give them the second half of my 3-hour class and tell me, what's it like growing up like that? And although my students can't walk in their shoes, that's as close as they can get to understanding what someone else's life has been like.
What do you consider a successful class?
Well, I just finished a class, and you know, I have various students who say wonderful things to me at the end of the class, and the most important thing that they might say is, you know, I look at things a little differently now. And I think that's about the best we could do.
Yeah. You know, I know from participating in some of your classes that when I did it, it was 15, 20 years ago, and when I started. And as time went on, I heard different questions than I heard initially. I think you could see progress was made.
I can see progress,
and
right.
I think my favorite thing was, and I think Bob Egan started this, but Bob was a mutual friend, openly gay man at a time when it was difficult.
Very
to
difficult.
be so. But he would ask people to raise their hands if they knew anybody who was gay. Now his point was, very few people would raise their hands. His point was, you don't really know that you know people who are gay because they're not out to you. But I saw as the years went on, more hands went up.
And now almost everyone knows.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the most rapid gains that we have seen in discrimination, although we still are, I believe, as a country, homophobic.
Why do you believe that?
I just believe that because I get a certain number of students in my class who just, you know.
They're stalled.
I can go back to Bob Egan maybe 20 years ago, and when a student started crying after she heard his story, and she's the one who said, "You're such a nice man, but you're going to go to hell." And that's, you know, that's the thing that just really rocks you when you hear that, because Bob spent 9 years studying for the priesthood. He decided it wasn't for him, but I mean, he was a very good man, and I understand his brother just passed away.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Well, what about progress in with other minorities? Are you generally seeing
I
the
see
same
some
thing?
progress, not as much as I wish.
Yeah.
I mean, in the local political arena, I had great hopes this fall that I would live long enough to see a woman president. No, I don't.
Interesting. So, there are a lot of reasons people give for Hillary Clinton's loss. I don't hear much, once in a while, I don't hear much, though, from the pundits about maybe it had to do with people not being ready to vote for a woman.
Well, I'm sure that was true in many, many cases. The sexism is also a part of our country. We're ahead of some other countries. I spent 3 months in Japan in '94, which was a wonderful experience for me to be the other, because I didn't know Japanese. I was teaching over there for LCC, and I found that a fascinating experience. And they're 35 years behind us, but we're still not where we should be in terms of equity for women. And I see now some really wonderful efforts being made with young girls to catch them at prepubescent before they've gotten to high school and gotten turned off by math and science, by societal pressures. And because we know that they have the talent, some of them have the talent to be as good as some of the men. Boys, I don't, but we're not there yet. But we're getting there.
It's interesting, too, though, that one of the reasons that Trump won was the white suburban women voted for him in larger numbers than they expected. And, just as there's homophobia, have you ever encountered feminophobia? Women who... I don't know if there is such a thing.
Let's go back to Wood County.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Wood County, where...
where you grew up.
Where women voted the way their husbands said. Except for my grandmother. She and my grandfather had canceled each other's votes out, and I was always very amused by that. But many of the couples that I knew about, the women would do whatever the men said.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it was in the
Or
country.
would they say they voted the way their husband
Well, I always hoped that maybe they weren't exactly doing what they said.
Right.
But I know my grandmother voted separately. So,
yeah,
I think that, but I think that women are getting much more independent these days.
Yeah.
And realizing, as I told my daughter, prepare yourself to support yourself for life. If you decide you want to hook up with a guy, that's fine, but you got to be able to do it for yourself.
Yeah. I thought one of the interesting things in this election too was very, very little was made out of the fact that Bernie Sanders is Jewish. We're not that far away from when it was kind of a deal when Lieberman ran as vice president with Al Gore. There was quite a bit of talk about, he would be the first Jewish vice president. But what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's because Bernie himself didn't make much of his Jewishness.
Yeah, well, that is a difference from Senator Lieberman.
Yeah.
Who would take off the Sabbath.
He would take off Sabbath, right. I think that he just didn't really, in fact, if you read the Jewish Forward, you find they're not so happy that he didn't at least avow he was Jewish. But I think he just didn't. He's more a cultural Jew than a religious Jew. So,
of course, we don't really know either what might have happened had he gotten the nomination. It's one thing to be running. It's another thing to be the candidate.
Yeah, a lot of his ideas were attractive, but impossible. And then he had the socialist label. And there's, I think, a cadre in this country that doesn't like socialism.
Well, there's also I think there's a prejudice in the sense of an unfamiliarity, because I've run into people who said, he's a communist. I said, they're not. Socialism and communism are two different things.
Well, I know that, but going back, say, 50 years, it was very common for people to call socialists communists.
Right.
It was all part of the Liberty Lobby or whatever it was. That was just sort of rampant, especially in California.
Yeah. But of course, if you really look at history, we had the president who served the longest. Probably, you could say, yeah, he was a democratic socialist.
Well, I think he probably was.
He brought you electricity.
Right. And he was the only president I ever knew for a large part of my young life growing up.
What do you make of this debate? Some people think is just semantics. Trump raises it, but he chides, or more than chides, President Obama for refusing to say Islamic. I'm forgetting the word now. Radicalism, or terrorism. Radical. What do you think about all that?
Well, that's just more of his nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah. He will seize upon certain things and repeat and repeat, and many of them are fake, and people believe them. That distresses me. The fake news that people have believed. And that there doesn't seem to be any way to combat that. I felt really sad for Hillary having to put up with continuous fakery, lies, if you will, about her and her history, and there didn't seem to be any way to counteract that.
And it makes it difficult to have an election in which issues are discussed, because so much time is spent trying to rebut and refute
and
lies.
Trying to tear down your opponent.
Right.
Right. When the important thing is the issues. How would each of them govern?
Right.
And I guess we're finding right now it's going to be a different kind of government than we're used to.
Certainly is a more business-oriented government, with several generals having been appointed as well, and it's
different.
It's going to be something. It's interesting too, because we've both been around a while, and we've never seen. We don't know what to expect, because we've never seen a president
not seen this before.
With this background.
And the truth of the matter is, if you really get into diversity and get to know other people, that's really the key. We make these assumptions. The moment I walk in the room, they make assumptions about me, because I'm not 39 anymore. Okay, and that really begins their first lesson on not assuming, getting to know someone, finding out they're more like you than not like you, and sort of opening up their minds. And that's what I hope to do in 16 weeks.
I want to turn the tables a little bit on you. So, do you have prejudices? Do you have to stop yourself and say, "Hey"?
We all grow up with them.
Yeah.
It's the way it is. You grow up being told by your parents that your group is the best, and you should be just like them. And we have to wait until we get some kind of knowledge about what that actually means. And then we have to, when we're grown up, I tell my students, you lay out all these things that you were taught, put them on the table, and you decide if you want to believe that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And if not, now's the time to change. We all have those locks in our mind. We know there are certain things we shouldn't say. If someone gives you permission to say those things, which I feel has happened in the most recent election, if you've been given permission, then all locks are gone. And we saw that in the rallies. Very, very unsettling.
Yeah, it was, because we saw people at what hitherto have always been mainstream events that weren't at those events in the past, because nobody was speaking to them.
That's right. Yeah. And we were taught, there are certain things you can't say, and most of us accepted that. Some of us didn't, but when someone gives you permission to say those things, then all bets are off.
Right, right. What do you make of, what do you see in your classes as far as prejudice against Muslims and Islam? Has that arisen? Has that risen, rather?
Yeah. What has happened in my classes, I haven't had time to really deal with it, but I tell my students from the very first day that we're going to talk about people who are different, but we're not going to deal with politics or religion. And Muslims are so intertwined with the religion that I've been slow to do much about that. I live a half a block from the mosque, and I go often, and when they have open things to see, I want to learn more about them. They're my neighbors. But I just haven't found enough time, believe it or not, in 16 weeks to work them in.
Yeah.
But they are being worked into the book now, and
good.
I certainly hope that the class continues. It has been successful. It was as successful as 16 sections at one time when our enrollment was up. It's only around 12 now. But it's a successful class, and it makes a difference. And certain departments have decided that it's a requirement, like the police academy, criminal justice majors, nursing, and it's a management class.
Yeah, that's quite a tribute.
Yeah. Well,
but so now, suddenly you're not teaching. What are you going to do in your spare time?
Well, everybody is asking me what I'm going to do, and I can't tell you for sure what I'm going to do.
Is there a book in there?
Huh?
Is there maybe a book or a memoir?
Well, maybe a memoir.
Maybe
I've
a
been
memoir.
thinking that's a good thing for people my age to do for my children and grandchildren. But I'll probably have time to do a little more fun things. Maybe I'll play bridge again.
Well, that's great. Well, it's been an honor talking to you today, and more than that, I really appreciate what you have done for this community. When we talk about influential people, we often talk about politicians or people with high profiles, but you've actually influenced thousands of people who are now helping run our community. So
I hope so.
Good work.
I hope so. Thank you.
Well, we will be back next week, and I'm very pleased that our guest will be the one and only Rodney Whitaker, and I hear he's going to bring his bass with him. So hope to see you then, but have a great rest of your weekend.